Have you ever stopped to think about those invisible digital locks? The ones securing pretty much everything in our modern lives.
It's staggering when you consider it.
Right. Your private messages, banking, even the operating systems running the world, they're all protected. And often at the heart of that security, you find this thing called a symmetric key.
hmm A fundamental building block.
But what happens when that key, that single shared secret that's supposed to protect everything, suddenly becomes, well, not secret anymore?
And that's the critical issue, isn't it? That's the vulnerability we really need to unpack today. A symmetric key, as you know, is efficient. Same key locks, same key unlocks. Super fast, super powerful.
But totally reliant on staying secret.
Exactly. Its strength is its secrecy. It's that single point of failure. If it gets compromised, all that protection it offered just evaporates, gone, exposing potentially huge amounts of sensitive data.
Okay, so that perfectly sets up our mission for this deep dive. We're going to explore the different ways these absolutely vital symmetric keys can actually be compromised.
Yeah, the attack vectors.
Exactly. We'll look at everything from, really sophisticated cyber attacks, the kind you see in movies, to surprisingly simple human mistakes that can, maybe ironically, be even more damaging.
Often are.
And understanding how these keys get recovered, it isn't just theory, right? It's absolutely essential for anyone serious about cybersecurity, especially, I think, for those of you navigating complex certifications like the CISSP.
Definitely. Core knowledge.
So if you're finding this kind of detailed, in-depth knowledge vital for your own cybersecurity journey, particularly if you're working through certifications like the CISSP, you already get how valuable structured learning and community support can be.
Absolutely.
Stick with us, because by the end of our deep dive today, we'll point you towards a fantastic resource where you can keep doing this kind of focused, practical learning. So with that foundation laid, how do these digital locks actually get picked? What are the main ways, the primary avenues an attacker might use to get their hands on or maybe reconstruct a symmetric key that was supposed to be completely secret? It's not just one thing, is it?
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
It's rarely just one simple path, which is precisely why that concept of defense in depth is so incredibly important.
Right.
The CISP body of knowledge, which is a fantastic guide for cybersecurity pros, lays out four main categories, four major attack vectors for symmetric key recovery.
Okay, what are they?
You've got brute force attacks, then cryptanalytic attacks, side channel analysis, and critically often overlooked, poor key management. Each one is distinct in how it works, but they all lead to the same place. An adversary recovering a key, decrypting your sensitive data, and basically wrecking the confidentiality and integrity of your system. Different methods, same disastrous outcome.
Okay, let's start with maybe the most straightforward one. The brute force attack. It sounds kind of blunt, almost like a digital sledgehammer.
It is, in a way.
Just trying every single possible key until you stumble on the right one. It sounds tedious, maybe even simple, but you're saying it can be really effective if the keys aren't long enough.
That's the essence of it. Brute force, or exhaustive key search, means just that. Systematically trying every single combination in the entire key space, one by one.
Until
the encrypted data suddenly makes sense, reveals its original readable plaintext form. The absolute critical factor here is the time it takes. And that time grows exponentially with the key length.
Exponentially, that's the key word.
Absolutely. For a key with n bits, an attacker needs to try, on average, about 2 to the power of n-1 keys. That exponential growth. It means adding just a few more bits to your key length makes the job dramatically, almost astronomically, harder for an attacker.
Right, it ramps up incredibly fast.
Exactly. It's the mathematical reason we keep hammering home that longer keys mean stronger keys. A small increase in length gives you a massive jump in security against this type of attack.
And there's a really famous, almost dramatic historical example that drove this point home, right? The 56-bit data encryption standard, DES.
Oh, DES.
It was the standard for years, but that 56-bit key length turned out to be its fatal flaw. Can you walk us through what happened back in, 1998, 1999?
Yeah, that period was a real turning point, a watershed moment for cryptography, really. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, the EFF, they led this very public effort. They actually built specialized hardware.
Deep crack.
Not the one, deep crack, designed specifically to just chew through DES keys as fast as possible. And at the same time, you had distributed .NET, this pioneering project, using thousands of ordinary computers connected over the internet.
Harnessing collective power.
Exactly. Thousands of machines working together. Their goal was simple. Prove definitively that a 56-bit DES key was breakable by a determined attacker with resources.
And they did it.
They absolutely did, with astonishing speed. The EFF's deep crack machine recovered a DES challenge key in just 22 hours and 15 minutes.
22 hours for what was a global standard.
Incredible, isn't it? It proved what cryptographers had been warning about for years. That 56-bit key space just wasn't big enough anymore. Computing power had caught up.
So why was that public demonstration so critical? What did it really reveal about cryptographic security?
It proved beyond any doubt that a 2 to the 56 key space was no longer computationally infeasible. It wasn't just theory. It shattered that illusion of security, showing that dedicated hardware and distributed computing could make brute force practical.
It made the theoretical real.
Precisely. And this public, undeniable proof, it massively accelerated the move away from DES. It basically forced the issue. That DES debacle taught us a hard lesson. Even something considered unbreakable has an expiry date.
So today's standard might be tomorrow's vulnerability.
Always. You have to keep evolving, which is why modern guidance, from NIST and others, mandates symmetric keys of at least 128 bits. Think AES 128 or higher. These longer key lengths, 180 bits, 256 bits, the number of possible keys is just astronomical. 21, 28, 22, 56. It makes an exhaustive search completely impractical with any current or foreseeable technology. Even giant cloud GPU farms or massive botnets can't crack that.
Okay, so brute force is about raw power against key length. Let's pivot to cryptanalytic attacks. This sounds more subtle. It's not just guessing, right? It's about finding flaws in the cipher itself.
Exactly. Cryptanalysis is a much more sophisticated game. It goes way beyond just trying keys. Cryptanalysts dive deep into the math, the logic, the structure of the encryption process itself.
Looking for weaknesses.
Yeah. Looking for non-random patterns, statistical biases, maybe inherent design flaws in the algorithm or how it's being used as mode of operation. The aim is to drastically cut down the number of keys they need to try, or maybe even derive the key directly without any exhaustive search at all.
How?
By finding relationships between the plaintext, the ciphertext, and the key that the cipher's designers never intended to exist, exploiting those unintended properties.
And there's a really unsettling example here, too, involving the GSM A5 cipher used in older 2G cell phones. The disturbing part is that its weakness was apparently deliberate.
Yes, the A51 story is sobering. The implications for privacy were huge. A51 nominally had a 64-bit key, but it was intentionally weakened.
Why?
Often attributed to, let's say, government requirements, balancing privacy with surveillance capabilities. Effectively, its security was reduced to only about 54 bits, maybe up to 64 in some analyses, but significantly less than the full 64.
Making it much easier to crack.
Much easier. It made it vulnerable to things like time memory trade-off attacks. Think of it like pre-calculating answers to a puzzle. You build massive tables, rainbow tables, storing key possibilities.
So you don't have to compute it live.
Exactly. Researchers use these pre-computed tables, sometimes with specialized hardware like FPGAs, to just look up the keys. They could recover A51 keys and decrypt calls in minutes, sometimes even seconds, just by capturing the encrypted traffic.
Seconds. Wow.
And beyond A51, you have classical techniques like differential and linear cryptanalysis. These were used against older block ciphers like DES. If you have enough known plaintext and its corresponding ciphertext, these attacks can find statistical weaknesses that drastically reduce the brute force effort needed.
So it's not always about the cipher algorithm itself. The protocol matters, too.
Hugely. Protocol design flaws are a major vulnerability source.
Yeah.
A classic example is reusing nonces or initialization vectors of Vs. Think of an IV as a unique starting value for each encryption.
Like a serial number for the encryption.
Sort of. If you reuse the same IV with the same key for different messages, you create mathematical relationships between the ciphertext that shouldn't be there. An attacker can exploit these relationships to figure out parts of the key or even the original messages.
And that's what happened with WEP, right? Early Wi-Fi encryption.
Precisely.
Yep.
WEP's reuse of short Vs with the RC4 stream cipher was its fatal flaw. Made it trivially breakable.
Okay, this next one feels like it's straight out of a spy novel. Even if the math is strong, the key is long. The physical device doing the encryption can betray the secret. Side channel analysis.
This is where things get really ingenious and often quite sneaky. Side channel attacks don't attack the algorithm directly. They don't guess the key. Instead, they watch the device while it's doing the cryptography.
Watching it. How?
By monitoring its physical side effects. Tiny things, like timing attacks, measuring the exact fraction of a second it takes to encrypt or decrypt. Sometimes operations take slightly different amounts of time depending on the key bits being used.
No way.
Oh yeah, or power analysis, observing the minuscule fluctuations in electricity the chip draws as it works. Different operations consume slightly different amounts of power.
That seems incredibly subtle.
It is. There's also electromagnetic analysis, picking up faint radio waves emitted by the chip. Even acoustic analysis, listening to the faint sounds the device makes. Any observable side effect that correlates, even weakly, with the key operations can leak information. Over many measurements, you can piece together the key bits.
Mind-blowing. And then there's this cold boot attack on RAM. You mentioned freezing memory chips. How does that even work?
It sounds wild, but it leverages a physical property of RAM. Data in volatile memory doesn't vanish instantly when the power cuts off, especially if you cool it down rapidly.
Like with compressed air.
Exactly. Or even liquid nitrogen for more extreme cooling. If you chill the RAM chips enough, the data remnants, the electrical charges representing the bits, can persist for seconds, sometimes even minutes, after power loss.
So an attacker with physical access
Can quickly cool the RAM, pull the modules out, slap them into a special reader device, and dump the entire memory contents before they fade. Then they just scan that memory dump.
looking for keys.
Looking for keys. Full disk encryption keys for BitLocker, File Vault, older TrueCrypt volumes, application keys held in memory. It's a potent physical access attack. And it's not just RAM. Think about smart cards, IoT devices. Countless examples have been broken using power analysis. Just watching the power signature as they perform an AES operation can leak the key.
Even a tiny device.
Yep. A few milliseconds of careful measurement on a smart card doing AES might be enough to extract the entire key if you know what you're looking for. It really highlights that you have to protect the physical execution environment, not just the algorithm.
Okay, so we've had brute force, cryptanalysis, side channels. Finally, sometimes the most sophisticated lock gets defeated not by a master thief, but because someone just left the key under the mat. Poor key management.
And this is often the most frustrating one because it's usually preventable. Poor key management covers all those operational mistakes, human errors, bad system designs that just expose the key. No fancy math needed.
It's a direct leak.
Exactly. It's not inferring the key, it's finding the key itself because of bad practices. Weak policies, lack of training, sometimes just plain negligence.
Can you give some solid examples? I remember you mentioned something about weak random number generators earlier. That sounds like a big one.
It is a huge one. Using weak or predictable random number generators, RNGs, to create keys is a cardinal sin in cryptography. A secure key must be random, truly unpredictable.
Needs enough entropy, right.
Precisely. If the RNG isn't genuinely random, or if it's poorly seeded, meaning it doesn't start with enough unpredictable input, the keys it produces might look random, but they're actually guessable.
Like the Debian OpenSSL bug.
The perfect, infamous example. Back in 2008, a tiny coding error in Debian's version of OpenSSL drastically reduced the amount of entropy used for key generation.
So it wasn't really random anymore.
Not nearly random enough. It meant only a relatively small, predictable set of keys were actually being generated. For things like SSH host keys, SSL keys. Suddenly, keys that should have been impossible to brute force became guessable because attackers knew the limited pool they came from, nullified the crypto completely. And there's so many other ways. Using default keys shipped with hardware, hard-coding keys directly into software. That's just asking for trouble.
One key fits all until it doesn't.
Exactly. Reusing the same key excessively is another classic blunder, especially with scream ciphers or things like one-time pads. Reusing a one-time pad destroys its security instantly.
Right.
Or just failing to protect keys properly, leaving them in plain text in log files, storing them unencrypted in configuration files, not clearing them from memory properly.
Just basic operational security failures.
Fundamentally, any situation where a key is left unprotected, weakly generated, stored insecurely, logged in plain text, it's basically handed to an attacker or malicious insider on a silver platter. Weak randomness, no key rotation, keys in plain text anywhere, all direct routes to compromise. And this really ties it all together. Brute force, cryptanalysis, side channels, poor management, each one hammers home why defense in depth is non-negotiable.
You can't just rely on one thing.
No way. Strong algorithms, long keys, that's just the start. You absolutely must pair that with disciplined operations, secure RNGs, proper hardware protection for keys, continuous monitoring. You need layers to truly prevent key leakage or discovery.
Okay, so we've mapped out these 4 main pathways, but theory is one thing. Let's make this real. Let's talk about some actual incidents where symmetric keys were compromised. These aren't just hypotheticals, right? These are the events that shaped how we do cybersecurity today.
Absolutely. These are the hard lessons learned. Real events, often with massive consequences, that directly led to the best practices and standards we now rely on. Understanding these stories is crucial, especially for CISSP candidates, because history definitely repeats itself if we don't learn from it.
Let's start with the big one we already touched on, the breaking of DES back in '98 and '99. That was really the first public, undeniable proof that a major standard could be brute force.
It really was. The attack vector was crystal clear. Inadequate key length, 56 bits. Cryptographers had warned for years it wasn't enough against rising compute power.
And the EFF and distributed.net proved them right.
They did. EFF built deep crack. Distributed.net marshaled thousands of PCs. They took on the DES challenge ciphertext, and in just over 22 hours.
Pop. Key recovered.
Key recovered, publicly, verifiably. It wasn't theoretical anymore, it was done.
And the impact. What changed after that?
The impact was huge and immediate. It proved DES was insecure for anything needing real long-term security. It forced everyone's hand, accelerating its deprecation. NIST officially withdrew it by 2005, mandating triple DS, or, much more importantly, AES for new systems.
So the lesson.
The lesson is stark. Never rely on outdated short key ciphers. What's strong today might be weak tomorrow. Always use current standards like AES 128, AES 256. Keep up with the recommendations.
Okay, next up, WEAP, wired equivalent privacy. So many of us use that for our first home Wi-Fi thinking it was secure. Boy, were we wrong.
Oh, WEP. A painful classic example of how a bad protocol design can kill even decent crypto components. The attack vector wasn't RC4 itself, but how WEAP used it, specifically its handling of initialization vectors, ADs.
What was the problem with the IVs?
Two main things. First, the IV was only 24 bits long, which is tiny. On a busy network, you'd start reusing the same IVs very quickly. Second, and this was the killer, certain IV values called weak EVs, when combined with the static WEP key, produce predictable patterns in the first few bytes of the RC4 key stream. So researchers Flerer, Manton, and Shamir figured this out in 2001. They showed you could just capture Wi-Fi packets, look for packets starting with these weak IVs, and collect enough of them.
And crack the key.
Tools like AirSnort and AirCrack automated this. You could capture maybe a few million packets, just minutes on a busy network, run the FMS or Quark attacks, and boom, you had a WP key.
Meaning anyone nearby could read your traffic.
Read your traffic, inject their own traffic, connect to your network, game over.
So the impact was basically total Wi-Fi insecurity for a while. And the lesson from WEP?
Widespread insecurity, absolutely. It forced the industry to ditch WEP fast and move to WPA, then WPA2, which finally brought in strong AES encryption. The critical lesson: a flawed protocol or bad key scheduling can completely wreck even strong ciphers. It doesn't matter if RC4 used correctly is okay if the protocol around it is broken. Always use vetted protocols like WPA2, WPA3, and never reuse static keys or IVs. Uniqueness is everything for IVs.
No, GSM A5, the 2G cell phone encryption. This one is particularly chilling because, as you said, the weakness was apparently a deliberate choice.
Yeah, that's what makes A51 so disturbing. The attack vector was an intentionally weakened cipher. Nominally 64 bits, but effectively closer to 54 bits because of how it was designed, likely for easier government interception.
So they built in a weakness.
Seems that way. And cryptanalysts like Barkan and others demonstrated back in the mid-2000s that you could recover A51 keys in seconds, sometimes just from the encrypted traffic alone. Later, massive rainbow table projects using FPGAs and GPUs, like Karsten Knoll's work, could crack any A51 call in minutes. And reports confirm that NSA could routinely decrypt it.
So millions of phone calls weren't private at all. That's a massive breach of trust. The lesson here seems pretty stark.
Huge breach of trust. It undermined 2G voice privacy globally. While networks moved to stronger ciphers like A53 and on to 3G, 4G, those legacy 2G networks stuck around, remaining vulnerable. The powerful lesson: deliberate weakening of crypto, whether for escrow or surveillance, backfires. It leaves everyone vulnerable. Always push for strong, standard, uncompromised algorithms.
Okay, this next one, Crypto AG. This really does sound like a spy thriller. A trusted vendor selling secure machines, but secretly owned by intelligence agencies.
It's an incredible true story. The attack vector here was the ultimate insider threat: vendor compromised products. Crypto AG, a Swiss company, was a world leader in encryption hardware for decades, sold to governments everywhere.
But secretly?
Secretly owned by the CIA and West Germany's BND, revealed in 2020. This meant the machines they sold had built-in weaknesses. Deliberately weakened algorithms, maybe advertised as strong but effectively much weaker. Or, sometimes, pre-installed keys or key derivation methods that only the owners knew. The attackers, the CIA and BND, often didn't need to recover keys in the field.
They already had them.
They effectively already had them or could easily get them because they designed the flaws themselves.
The impact must have been devastating when this came out.
Absolutely devastating. The U.S. and Germany had been reading these supposedly secure diplomatic and military communications of over 120 countries for decades. It shattered trust in hardware vendors, in black box security. The lesson is profound. Never blindly trust opaque vendors. Insist on open standards, independent audits, backdoors, even from allies, destroys security. And beyond these big names, there are other important examples that reinforce these points.
Like the cold boot attacks we discussed.
Exactly. Cold boot attacks on disk encryption prove that keys and RAM are vulnerable to physical attackers. Penetration testers regularly find SSL/TLS session keys just sitting in server memory if it's not properly protected.
So keys need protection even when they're actively being used.
Absolutely. And think about embedded devices, IoT stuff. So many ship with default symmetric keys. Attackers just scan the internet for devices using these known default keys to take them over or decrypt their traffic. Classic poor key management at scale.
So looking across all these incidents, DES, WEP, A51, crypto AG, cold boot, default keys, there's a clear pattern, isn't there?
Definitely. A fundamental weakness, whether it's math, protocol, side channel, or just bad practice, consistently gets exploited. The impact ranges from academic proof of concepts to massive global espionage or just widespread insecurity for everyday users.
And the lesson for you, listening now.
The lesson is that strong encryption is only as secure as its weakest link, period.
Right.
It could be the algorithm, the implementation, the physical security, or just how you manage the keys. You have to look at the whole picture.
Which brings us to the crucial part. What can we actually do? How do we build that fortress? How do we proactively defend against these attacks? For anyone aiming for CISSP, this is practical application time.
Exactly. This is where the theory meets practice. And the core principle for CISSP candidates, for everyone, is cryptography is only secure with good practices. It's not enough to just turn on encryption. It's about defense in depth, specifically focused on protecting the keys. The keys are everything. First things first. Use strong algorithms and adequate key lengths. Choose well-vetted modern ciphers. That means AES 128, AES 256 for symmetric block encryption. Chapter 20 is excellent for streaming needs. For hashing and message authentication, SHA-2 family, HMAC.
And avoid the old stuff.
Absolutely. Rigorously avoid known broken or weak algorithms. DES, RC4, MD5, SHA-1. Stick to standards from FIPS, NIST. Do the heavy lifting of analyzing cryptographic strength.
In key lengths, you said AES 128 minimum.
NIST recommends at least 112 bits of security strength, which practically means AES 128 for most things today. But think ahead. For data needing secrecy for decades, or against future threats like quantum computing, NIST suggests considering AES 256 or strong elliptic curve cryptography. Longer keys buy you time and resilience. Second, secure key generation is non-negotiable. Keys should be born inside a trusted, hardened environment. Think hardware security module, HSM, or a FIPS-validated software library running in a secure space.
The key should never see the light of day in plain text outside that vault.
Ideally never. It should be generated, used, and destroyed within its secure boundary. NIST SP 857 has detailed guidance on this.
And the random number generation aspect, crucial, right?
Absolutely critical. Use a cryptographically secure pseudo-random number generator, CSPRNG, and make sure it's properly seeded with enough real-world randomness, enough entropy. The Debian OpenSSL bug is the nightmare scenario if you get this wrong. Weak randomness equals weak keys, period. Third, key protection during storage and handling. Keys need protection throughout their entire life. When they're at rest, not being actively used, store them encrypted. This is often called key wrapping, encrypting the data key with a stronger master key, a key encrypting key or keek.
And definitely not in plain text anywhere.
Never, ever store symmetric keys in plain text on disk and logs and config files. Keep them in protected memory segments or ideally within dedicated hardware like an HSM or TPM.
These sealed vaults you mentioned, like HSMs, TPMs, secure enclaves.
Exactly. Those are designed for this. As OWASP puts it, keys and cryptographic operations should be done inside the sealed vault. The actual encryption-decryption happens inside, the key doesn't leave. And even when in RAM, minimize the time a key is in plain text. Use memory protection, scrub the memory immediately after use. Protect against those cold boot and memory scraping attacks. Fourth, apply least privilege and separation of duties. Who or what process actually needs access to this key? Restrict it tightly. Ideally, no human ever directly interacts with raw key material. Use abstraction layers.
And different keys for different jobs.
Yes. Don't reuse the same key for encrypting data and authenticating messages or for securing different systems. Separate keys limit the damage if one gets compromised.
And logging is key here, too, for tracking.
Absolutely essential. Log every key operation. Generation, use, rotation, deletion. Create strong audit trails. You need to know who did what when. Detect anomalies, unauthorized access attempts. OWASP emphasizes accounting for everyone who can view or use keys. Fifth, regular key rotation and forward secrecy. Don't use the same key forever. Change keys periodically based on data sensitivity and your threat model. If a key does get compromised, rotation limits the amount of data exposed.
And perfect forward secrecy, PFS, how does that fit?
PFS is huge for communication protocols like TLS or secure messaging. It uses ephemeral possession keys. Even if an attacker compromises the long-term key later, like the server's main private key, they cannot go back and decrypt past sessions because those temporary session keys were discarded. It protects past communications. Essential. Sixth, use secure protocols and modes. For symmetric encryption, use authenticated encryption modes like AES GCM or ChaCha20 Poly3035. These provide confidentiality and integrity authenticity, protecting against attacks like padding oracles.
And the IVs. Never reuse them.
Never, ever reuse an IV or nonce with the same key. Absolute rule. That prevents attacks like the WEP disaster. Every encryption needs a unique starting point with the same key.
Network protocols, too. Keep them current.
Always. Use the latest secure versions, WPA3 for Wi-Fi, TLS 1.3 for web traffic, and actively disable old, insecure protocols and weak cipher suites. Don't leave those vulnerabilities open. Seventh, hardware and software hardening. Keep systems patched. Vulnerabilities like Meltdown Spectre could potentially leak keys across process boundaries, disable unnecessary services, debug ports, anything that could expose secrets or offer an attack surface.
Now for really high security, maybe even physical shielding.
Yes. Use Compton time crypto libraries to prevent timing attacks. And in sensitive environments, physical countermeasures like electromagnetic shielding or noise generation can defend against advanced side-channel attacks. Eighth, backup and recovery. You need secure backups of your keys encrypted with a strong KE in case of loss, but protect those backups like gold. Store them securely, maybe offline, tamper-resistant.
And escrow.
Escrow policies might be needed for encryption keys to recover data, but generally not for signing keys, which prove identity. As OWASP PIS, plan key backup carefully because lost keys mean lost data. And finally, ninth, drawing directly from the crypto AG nightmare. Vet your vendors and review code. Don't blindly trust closed-source black box crypto. Insider threats or state-level compromises are real.
Open standards. Audits.
Yes. Prefer open standards, open source implementations where feasible. Conduct independent security reviews of any hardware or software handling your keys. Transparency and verification are crucial. So, by layering all these things, strong crypto, secure generation, protection, access control, rotation, secure protocols, hardening, backups, vetting, you build that fortress, you dramatically reduce the risk of key recovery. It's about discipline across the board.
Wow. That was incredibly thorough. A real deep dive into the sometimes scary world of symmetric key recovery, from brute force becoming practical to those chilling, deliberate backdoors. It really shows how even strong encryption isn't magic. It needs constant care and discipline.
Exactly. Symmetric keys are amazingly powerful tools, but they're also incredibly sensitive. For CISSP candidates, for anyone in security, understanding how they can be broken is just as important as knowing how to use them. And as we saw, the attacks range from high-tech exploits to simple, avoidable mistakes.
Yeah, that pattern across all those historical failures, DES cracked, WEP broken, A51 weakened, crypto AG subverted the lesson seems clear. Preventing key recovery isn't just about complex math. It's about operational discipline.
It truly is. People, process, technology. The formula is straightforward. Strong cipher plus long key plus good management equals strong security. Flip any of those weak cipher, short key, or sloppy practices, and you're heading for compromise. You really have to grasp both the technical attacks and the human or operational failures.
So thinking about all these ways things can go wrong, it makes you wonder. Beyond just picking a strong password, what ongoing habits should you, our listener, build into your daily digital life to really embrace this operational discipline around keys and secrets? Something to chew on. And this whole discussion, digging into specific examples, best practices, attack vectors, this is exactly the kind of critical thinking and detailed knowledge you need for cybersecurity roles, and especially if you're tackling the CISSP exam.
Foundational stuff.
If you're looking for a place to keep learning like this, to connect with other people on the same journey, and really master these concepts, we strongly recommend checking out CISSPstudygroup.com.
Great community over there.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource for deepening your understanding and getting ready for the CISSP. So head over to CISSPstudygroup.com, join the group, and definitely share it with anyone else you know who's studying. That's CISSPstudygroup.com. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.